She thought I would beg. She thought I would crawl back to her after she tore me down in front of everyone. Instead, I signed the divorce papers, handed them over, and walked away with my head high. 2 months later, when the dust had finally started to settle, and my life was finding a quiet rhythm again, there came a knock at my door that changed everything. But before I tell you what happened that day, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every reaction keeps these stories alive. Those 2 months after the divorce felt like years. The house was quieter than I had ever known it. Yet in that silence, I began to breathe again. I'd wake up with the sun creeping through the blinds, make myself a simple breakfast and sit with the sound of the coffee machine humming in the background. Some mornings the ache of betrayal still crept in, like a bruise that hadn't faded. But most days, I found small comforts in the routine. I'd go for long walks through the neighborhood, stop by the diner where the waitress knew my order before I even sat down, or spend evenings with a book I had put off reading for years. I had cut ties with most of the people connected to her world. At the start, there were texts from mutual friends who didn't know how to pick a side, awkward apologies from people who had laughed at her jokes at my expense, and even a few attempts from her to reel me back in with promises she would never keep. I ignored them all. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting. I was simply living, and that felt like power. But even in that peace, I could feel the eyes of others. Small town whispers carry further than most people realize. At the grocery store, I'd catch a look that said, "There goes the man she humiliated." At the hardware shop, I'd overhear someone mention her name and quickly lower their voice when I walked in. I learned to keep my head high, not out of pride, but out of necessity. You can't stop people from talking, but you can decide how you'll walk through the fire of their words. One evening, a neighbor invited me over for a barbecue. It was nothing fancy: burgers, beer, and a few chairs scattered across the lawn. Still, it felt good to be around people without pretense. When someone cracked a joke at my expense, it wasn't cruel. It was in good fun. And I laughed with them. That laughter felt like medicine. It reminded me that life wasn't just about betrayal or pain. It was about moments like that when the weight lifted, even if only for a few hours. Yet, in quiet moments, the image of her face the day I walked away still came back to me. The shock, the disbelief, the way she realized too late that I wasn't the man she thought she could toy with forever. That memory didn't sting anymore. It strengthened me. It was the reminder that I had chosen myself over her chaos. 2 months passed like that, each day a little lighter, each night a little less haunted. And then came that knock at my door. It was late afternoon, the golden light of the sun spilling across the porch. I almost ignored it, thinking it was just a delivery. But when I opened the door, I froze. There she was, not her, but her sister. Her name was Laura. I hadn't seen her since the divorce was finalized. She was the quiet one in the family, the one who always stood a little off to the side during gatherings, watching but rarely speaking. Yet that day, there was nothing quiet about her. She stood on my doorstep, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes filled with a determination I had never seen before. "I can't stay silent anymore," she said, her voice firm, but carrying a trace of pain. "I watched her lie to you. I watched her destroy you while everyone left. And I said nothing. But I won't carry that silence any longer." She paused, her eyes locking with mine, unflinching. "You deserve to know the truth, and you deserve someone who chooses you. I choose you." Her words hung in the air, heavier than any I had heard since the night everything fell apart. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. And that was the moment everything shifted again. I stood there at the doorway, staring at Laura, the late afternoon sun framing her in a halo of golden light that made the moment feel unreal. For a long time, I didn't move. My hands still rested on the door frame, my breath shallow as her words echoed in my ears. "I choose you." Simple words, yet they carried the weight of 2 months of silence, of betrayal, of loneliness. My mind struggled to process them, and part of me wondered if I had misheard, but the fire in her eyes told me I hadn't. She meant every syllable. Slowly, I stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. She entered cautiously, as if crossing some invisible boundary that had once kept her tethered to her sister's world. She glanced around the house, her gaze lingering on the empty dining table, the bare living room walls where photographs had once hung, and the half-empty bookshelf where I had packed away reminders of a marriage that no longer existed. Her face softened. "It feels different here," she said quietly, "like the weight is gone." I poured 2 glasses of water and handed her one. Unsure if I should sit or stand, I finally settled into the armchair while she sat on the couch. Her back straight, her hands curled around the glass like it was an anchor. For a few moments, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was expectant, like the pause before a storm breaks. Finally, I asked, "Why now?" She met my eyes without flinching. "Because I can't stand watching her keep spinning lies. After the party, after the divorce, she told everyone you were cruel to her, that you abandoned her, that she was the victim." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I kept my mouth shut because I thought it wasn't my place. "But every day since then, I've hated myself for letting you carry it alone. And I realized that silence is a kind of betrayal, too." Her words cut deep, not because they hurt, but because they resonated. I had lived through silence, my own and others. I had thought I was the only one who noticed, the only one who carried the truth. Hearing her admit that she had seen it too gave me a strange sense of validation. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Laura, do you know what it felt like to sit at dinners where she made me the punchline? To smile through the jokes. To pretend the laughter didn't break me piece by piece." My voice shook despite myself. I thought no one else noticed. I thought everyone agreed I was the fool. Laura shook her head firmly. "I noticed. I noticed every smirk, every eye roll, every time she twisted the knife, and everyone else laughed to keep the peace. I wanted to speak up, but I was afraid. Afraid of being the outcast in my own family. Afraid of being her target next, but fear doesn't excuse silence. And I won't let fear keep me quiet anymore." There was a rawness in her voice, an honesty that filled the room like oxygen. For the first time since the divorce, I felt something break inside me. Not pain, but a release. I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath for longer than I knew. We talked for hours. She told me stories I hadn't known. Little glimpses of what went on behind the scenes. The things my ex had whispered about me when she thought no one was listening. Lies designed to make me small. To paint me as a man without backbone. Laura confessed how it sickened her to hear it. How she had felt trapped between loyalty to her sister and the truth she knew in her heart. And I told her what it felt like to live under that shadow. To wake up every day wondering if the world saw me as a man or as her punchline. At one point, Laura reached across the space between us and touched my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything we had shared in that conversation. Her hand was warm, steady, a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I had believed. I looked at her and saw not just the sister of the woman who had betrayed me, but someone who had carried her own wounds in silence, someone who understood the language of pain and resilience. The hours slipped away unnoticed. The sun set, casting the room in a soft twilight. Still, we sat there, two people bound by truth, by brokenness, and by something neither of us dared to name yet. When she finally rose to leave, she paused at the door. "You don't have to decide anything now," she said softly. "I just needed you to know where I stand, that I see you, that I believe in you, and that I choose you." Then she left, the click of the door echoing in the quiet house. I stood there long after she was gone, my hands still resting on the doorknob, my heart pounding with something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not grief, not even relief, something different, something alive. And I knew that whatever came next, my life would never be the same again. That night after Laura left, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her words repeating themselves in my head. "I choose you." They weren't casual. They weren't meant as comfort. They were deliberate, steady. The kind of words that shifted the ground beneath you. I replayed the look in her eyes. The way her voice didn't shake, the way her hand had lingered over mine like she was grounding both of us. Sleep never came, only thoughts. By dawn, I got out of bed, made coffee, and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood wake up, still turning those words over like stones in my hand. For years, my mornings had been filled with dread. I would wake up wondering what sharp joke my wife would toss my way at breakfast, what jab she would make in front of others, how I would be made small before the day even started. After the divorce, my mornings became quiet but heavy. The kind of quiet that pressed against you. But that morning felt different. The heaviness wasn't there. There was something lighter, something close to anticipation. The next day, I tried to go about my routine as if nothing had changed. I went for a walk, nodded at the neighbors, stopped by the diner, and read the paper. But everywhere I went, my mind wandered back to her. Not to my ex, but to Laura, to the strength in her voice, the regret in her confession, the honesty I had hungered for all those years. For the first time, I realized that the betrayal I had suffered hadn't just been mine alone. She had been betrayed, too, by her own sister. By the silence she forced herself into, by the loyalty she had been expected to keep. 2 days later, she called me. Her voice on the phone was careful, almost hesitant, like she didn't want to assume too much. "I didn't scare you the other day, did I?" she asked softly. I let out a laugh I hadn't realized I was holding. "Scare me? No, Laura, you didn't scare me. You surprised me, but in a way I needed." I could almost hear her exhale on the other end. Then she said, "Would you meet me for coffee? Just to talk again?" I agreed without hesitation. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place that smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with a steaming cup in her hands. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back. No pretense, no performance. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the practiced smile of someone trying to impress, but the kind of smile that starts in the eyes before it reaches the lips. I sat across from her, and for a while, we didn't talk about anything heavy. We talked about books, movies, the kind of small things people discuss when they're circling something bigger. But eventually, the conversation turned back. She told me how growing up with her sister had been like standing in someone else's shadow. Rebecca always had to be the center of attention, Laura said, stirring her coffee absently. She needed the spotlight, and she didn't care who she hurt to get it. "You weren't the first, Mark. She did it to me, too, just in different ways. Always louder, always brighter, always making me feel like I wasn't enough. But when she turned that on you, it cut deeper than I expected because I could see you shrinking, and it broke me to stay quiet." Her eyes glistened when she said it, though she didn't cry. I told her I understood. I told her what it felt like to be ridiculed by someone who was supposed to protect you. How it eroded me piece by piece. "But you being here now," I said quietly. "That means more than you know. You saw me when no one else did." She reached across the table and touched my hand again, the same way she had in my living room, and I let her. There was no rush of fireworks, no dramatic swell of romance. It was steadier than that, more grounding. Two broken people recognizing the pieces that fit. From then on, we saw each other more often. Walks through the park, long talks on the phone, simple dinners where the conversation flowed without effort. She didn't fill the silence with noise the way her sister had. She let silence exist, and in that silence, I found peace. Sometimes she would ask me about the marriage, about the little moments that had chipped away at me. And I would tell her, not because I wanted to relive it, but because speaking it out loud with someone who understood was a way of reclaiming myself. Other times, we didn't talk about the past at all. We talked about the future, about things we wanted to do, places we wanted to go. For the first time in years, I began to imagine what a future could look like without the constant weight of ridicule. But beneath all of it, there was still a question neither of us voiced. What did it mean, this bond we were building? Was it friendship born out of shared pain? Or was it something deeper forming between us? I didn't push for an answer, and neither did she. Instead, we let it unfold one moment at a time. One evening, she invited me to her apartment for dinner. She cooked pasta. We shared a bottle of wine. And for hours, we sat at her table, laughing, trading stories, and letting the night stretch long past when it should have ended. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. There was a pause, a silence thick with unspoken words. She looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten, then whispered, "I meant what I said, Mark. I choose you, not out of pity, not out of rebellion, but because I see you, the real you, and I don't ever want you to forget that." Her words lingered long after I drove home that night. They weren't grand declarations. They weren't promises painted in gold. They were real, and for a man who had lived years with nothing but false smiles and cruel laughter, that reality was more powerful than anything else. Weeks passed and what began as cautious steps into unfamiliar territory became something steady and undeniable. Laura and I saw each other often. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for quiet dinners, sometimes just for long walks where words didn't matter as much as the company. With her, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. Didn't feel the need to brace myself against ridicule or prepare for the sting of a cutting remark. She looked at me like I was enough exactly as I was. And for a man who had spent years being told otherwise, that was a kind of healing I didn't know I needed. Still, there was always a shadow in the background. The unspoken reality that she was my ex-wife's sister. We both knew the weight that carried, the whispers that would come if people found out. At first, we didn't care because it was just us, two people clawing their way back from betrayal. But as we grew closer, we could feel that storm approaching. Came sooner than expected. One afternoon, as Laura and I sat on a park bench, sharing ice cream like teenagers, a voice called her name. We turned and there stood her mother, bags of groceries in her hands, eyes wide as if she had stumbled into a crime scene. The silence that followed was suffocating. Laura squeezed my hand and stood tall. "Mom," she said evenly. "This is Mark and he's part of my life now." Her mother's face shifted from shock to fury. Her voice sharp. "Your sister gave everything for him. And you think this is right? You think this is love?" The accusation wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at Laura. And that was the moment I saw the steel in her spine. "She didn't give everything," Laura said coldly. "She took everything. His dignity, his trust, his love, and she shattered it. I watched her destroy him while all of you laughed it off. Well, I'm done pretending. I choose truth, even if it makes you hate me." Her mother's mouth opened as if to argue, but Laura didn't give her the chance. She slipped her arm through mine, lifted her chin, and we walked away. My chest pounded, not from fear, but from pride. She had chosen me in front of her own family without hesitation. That night, we talked about it. I told her I didn't want to be the reason she lost her family, but she shook her head firmly. "Mark, I lost them the moment I stayed quiet while they sided with her lies. Standing with you isn't losing. It's finally living." Her words etched themselves into me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was building something new. Of course, Rebecca eventually found out. The text came late at night, venom wrapped in words. "Of all the women in the world, you had to crawl to my sister." Pathetic. I stared at the message for a long moment before putting the phone down. I didn't reply. She thrived on control, on pulling people into her chaos. Silence was my answer. The same silence that had torn her mask off at the party months ago. Beside me, Laura noticed my clenched jaw and placed her hand on mine. "Don't give her power," she whispered. And I didn't. Over the next weeks, people talked, of course. Friends who once avoided me now sent cautious texts trying to piece together what was happening. Neighbors gave sidelong glances when they saw Laura's car in my driveway. But the noise didn't matter. What mattered was how I felt when I woke up in the morning. How the house no longer felt hollow. How dinners were filled with conversation and laughter that wasn't cruel. How silence between us was never heavy but comforting. What mattered was the way she reached for my hand in crowded rooms, not to claim me, but to steady me. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Laura turned to me and said, "Do you realize what you've given me?" I frowned, not understanding. She smiled softly. "You've given me the chance to stop being invisible. I spent my whole life in her shadow, never enough, never seen. But with you, I feel like I finally exist." Her words pierced me because they were the mirror image of my own truth. I had been erased in my marriage, made small, made silent. But with her, I wasn't just surviving. I was alive. As the days rolled into months, I stopped measuring time by the weight of what I had lost and started measuring it by the strength of what I was building. The man who had once been ridiculed into silence was gone. In his place stood someone who had walked through betrayal and found love in the unlikeliest of places. Not in the arms of someone who broke him, but in the arms of someone who had watched, who had stayed silent too long and who finally chose to speak. And in that I found a lesson I will never forget. Sometimes the people who break you teach you about pain, but the ones who pick up the pieces teach you about truth. And sometimes truth doesn't need to be shouted. It doesn't need to be proven. Sometimes truth is as simple as someone knocking on your door and saying, "I choose you." Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps these stories